When it comes to podcast growth, there are so many misconceptions out there, and there's so much misinformation out there that it's hard to know what to believe. And chances are, if you've been podcasting for any length of time, you've been told, well, guest on other podcasts, or do this to grow your show, or do that to grow your show. And chances are you've tried some of those things and it still hasn't worked. So in this episode, we're answering a listener question and busting a very common misconception about podcast growth so that you can begin to understand what actually drives growth versus what's a waste of your time. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. So a few months back, we had a question come in from someone in our community who said, I've had my podcast for about 8 months. And frankly, I don't know what I should be doing to grow it because I share it to my email list. Admittedly, my list is small, but I share it to Facebook, I share it to Instagram, I share it to LinkedIn every week, but I still only have 37 subscribers. And this person went on to say it's on video. So I'm video podcasting, I'm on YouTube, and the audio is also available on all major podcasting platforms. So first of all, I love and I hate when questions like this come in because I love answering these kinds of questions to really get underneath why so much of the marketing advice out there when it comes to growing a podcast is actually false and why it actually doesn't work. And more importantly, what you need to have in place before applying any marketing strategy to your show so that your time spent marketing and promoting your podcast actually pays off. But I also hate when these questions come in because I understand what that's like. I understand the frustration of pouring your time and energy into something every week that you see other people succeeding with, and yet it's not happening yet for you. And there are times when we get people on our workshops and we're doing Q&A at the end. Most recently, someone comes to mind who says, I spend 10 to 15 hours a week on my podcast. 10 to 15 hours a week, and they're still not seeing a return. So none of us want to pour our time, and you're someone who values your time. I know that. I value my time. None of us want to pour our time into something that's not actually yielding a return. I think this is also why I hate social media so much, because for the past 8+ years of my business, social media has given me nothing. It's given me connection. I've had some great conversations with people on social media, but at the end of the day, I was never, and look, this could also be because of my commitment level to social media, but part of that was driven by the fact that the time I did put into social media didn't yield a return. So I had this very tenuous relationship with social media. And a lot of people can develop this kind of relationship with their podcasts too, where they're showing up, they're doing the things, they're going through the motions, they're creating the content, but it's not yielding a return and they're starting to resent the podcast. They're doing it because they have to. They're doing it because they feel like they should. But at the end of the day, they're just like not loving the process. And first and foremost, if that's you, and if you're experiencing that right now, we can fix it. That's what I want you to know. It can be fixed. There is hope for your show. Chances are there are some gaps in your process right now, and more importantly, gaps in your strategy that are causing listeners to overlook your show. But once we can plug those holes and fill those gaps, you're going to start to see traction pick up. How do I know? Because I speak from experience. I've had this podcast for over 5 years now. And I remember the very early days of my show, first couple of years of my show. I enjoyed the process of podcasting, so I stuck with it. I was consistent, never missed a week of putting out an episode. I was getting downloads, but I wasn't getting sales from it. I wasn't getting conversions from it. I wasn't getting people raising their hands saying, oh my gosh, can I work with you? And ultimately, that's what I wanted because that is how my mind measured success, whether that is the best way to measure success or not. But that was how my mind was looking and determining the success of my podcast. So it's natural. It's human instinct to want to see an ROI when you're putting time and effort into something. What most people don't realize about podcasting is that podcasting is 50% the content you put out, and it's 50% marketing of that content. And the mistake that most people make unknowingly is that they pour 100% of their time and effort into content, thinking that, well, as long as my content's good, people are going to find it, my show's going to grow. And they don't do a whole lot to market their podcast. Now, they might think they're marketing their podcast. They're sharing it to email. They're sharing it to social media. But at the end of the day, when it comes to growing a podcast, the secret to podcast growth, you ready? The quote unquote secret is you got to get that show in front of new people who don't know you yet. Plain and simple. If we're sharing our show to people who already know us, they already like us, they already trust us, they probably already listen to the podcast, or at least they know it exists, we're not going to get very far in terms of growth. It's not going to really lift the bottom line in terms of seeing those numbers climb. And the industry gets this wrong. We hear a lot of podcasting experts, quote unquote, saying, share your show to social media and have your guests share the show too, and get bigger guests on your show so that when they share it to their audience, your show will grow. And so I would think, okay, I'm going to get bigger guests on my show. And I would get people like Jordan Harbinger, okay, who gets like 15 million plus downloads a month. He came on my show. I saw no new growth from it. John Lee Dumas, great conversation, fabulous individual. I got no new growth from it. And so I started to learn through experience, maybe some of these things out there that people are saying grow a show aren't actually what it takes to grow a show. So I got really curious. A lot of people get frustrated in this scenario and when this happens, and a lot of people give up. For me, I don't know what it was or why that wasn't my reaction, but I got curious about it. And so I began to realize, you know what? There's a lot of confusing advice out there. There's a lot of misleading advice out there. And that's when I began to treat my podcast like a guinea pig. And I always tell our clients this. I'm like, my podcast is your guinea pig. I'm going to test things on my show and I will let you know if it works or not so that you don't have to waste your time on trial and error and experimentation. I got you covered. And so what's funny is now we get questions from clients and I'll be like, actually, I tested that and here's why you shouldn't do it. And they're like, thank you, because I was thinking about doing this. And now you're telling me that really wasn't effective. And so, we get into all the reasons why and all those things. So without going on a tangent, understanding that there's, first of all, a difference between warm traffic and cold traffic. There's a difference between being discovered and being discoverable. What I mean by that is being available on all the platforms. Okay, your podcast is live on all the platforms out there. It's discoverable, but that doesn't mean people are actually discovering your show. There's a difference between that. Like I mentioned, sharing to warm traffic is not going to get you very far. We've got to get your show in front of new cold listeners. All of that, though, means nothing, and it will do nothing for your podcast to go run ads to get your show in front of cold listeners, to go guest on other podcasts to get your show in front of listeners, or whatever other marketing tactics you want to do to get your show in front of cold listeners, unless you have your messaging and positioning dialed in first. Again, speaking from experience, in the early days of my podcast, I got on this kick one time about doing podcast guesting. And I had heard somewhere along the way that you can grow your show by doing lots of podcast guesting. And the more guest appearances you could have, the more your show would grow. So I went out and I would do multiple guest interviews a month, not just like 1 or 2, but like 8 or 10. I mean, there was a time where we were doing a lot of podcast guesting. And guess what? We really didn't see a whole lot of growth from it. So not only was I spending time to produce my own podcast, I was spending my time and energy to get on, i.e., find, pitch, land, book, get on other podcasts, and then delivering that content, actually recording the interview, and then seeing not a whole lot of change in terms of my stats, my download numbers, my engagement with my show. And so this is where I began to realize, you know what? That means that something else is missing. Because I was seeing other people have success with podcast guesting. I was seeing other people at the top of the charts, some of these people that we look up to, the big podcast hosts, the ones that everybody knows their name and you aspire to be like, because it's like, well, if they did it, so can I, why not me? But I realized that those shows must have something that mine doesn't. So again, I got curious. And this is where in digging deeper, really realized that not only was the core premise of my show completely unclear, I wasn't communicating any sort of clear promise to my listeners about what they were going to learn on the show. I was doing it to some degree, right? We all do it to some degree. Like, oh, you're going to listen to this show and you're going to be able to experience more income and more impact. And yet, if you're using the same old marketing lingo that everybody else is using, right? More income, more impact, more this, more success, more transformation. What does that actually give someone? And how does it make you different from other people who are saying the same thing in your niche? So before we build a strategy for a client to market and grow their podcasts, the first place we look to plug holes is messaging and positioning. It seems a little counterintuitive, and we've actually had people come and be like, I know all the basics. I don't need to do all that. I just want a plan to grow the show. And I'm like, I could give you a plan to grow the show, and you can go out and you could spend hours putting hours into marketing your show. But without this baseline foundation in place, all those efforts are going to go to waste because you're not going to be actually able to attract and retain those listeners, which is the key. That's the fundamental piece of growth. So if right now you've been doing this for 8 months, then congratulations, because first of all, you've made it farther than most podcasters make. Most give up by now. So keep going. Secondly, you've also learned that consistency is not the key to growth. You've learned that the hard way. And I learned it the hard way too. And so this is why a lot of the information out there is just not accurate. Because if consistency were all it took to grow a podcast, then you and I both know if you've been doing this for more than a month and you've been very consistent, right? You're doing this 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 2 years, 4 years, and you're still not seeing the growth that you want, then consistency is not the problem. We know it's not the problem. And it would also mean that everyone who has released an episode for a week or more on their podcast for 6 months or more, a year or more, would have a top show that's generating an ROI. And we both know that's not the case. So the reality of this is we have, as podcast hosts, need to come to terms with the fact that consistency matters when you know that you're doing the right activity, but it's not going to get you very far if you don't have that right activity dialed in. If you go to the gym 3 times a week, but you don't have a training plan, you don't have a strategy that you're following, you're just kind of doing the same thing there at the gym, you do some bicep curls, maybe do the Stairmaster for a little bit. Yeah, you did a workout, but can you really say you're making progress? It might feel good to move your body. But if your goal is to build muscle, it's going to take a little more than that. It's going to take strategy. It's going to take dialing in the things you don't see in the gym, like your hydration and your nutrition. Ask me how I know. I used to spend years, probably years of my life at the gym working out. I used to teach bar classes and all these things and it felt great. I didn't have any muscle to show for it. I was still like this skinny little 5'1" petite girl. So now I'm on actually like a bodybuilding, weightlifting type of journey. And yeah, I'm seeing some changes, but guess what? The changes aren't only happening in the gym. I could have continued to be consistent showing up and going to the gym, but without dialing in all the other things and or knowing that I was focusing on the right activity when I was at the gym, all the consistency in the world is not going to matter. So the very first thing that you need to have in place when it comes to your podcast, your messaging and positioning. Why? Because 33.5% of the way that people find podcasts is through word of mouth. So imagine increasing the findability of your show by 33.5% just because now you have a show that people actually want to recommend. A recommendable show that people actually share and that are excited to talk about. It brings me no greater joy when someone tells me, a friend of mine shared your podcast with me and I started listening and I absolutely love everything that I'm learning. I'm like, yes, because that's confirmation to know that, okay, the show is being talked about. And I want the same for you. Now, the other way that people find podcasts, it accounts for over 54% of the way people find podcasts, by the way, is SEO. Now, this is not something you hear a whole lot about in the podcast space yet. You heard it here first. Remember that. The beauty of podcast SEO is that it works in the background of your podcast 24/7 once you have the strategy dialed in. And with every new episode you release, it scales with you and it compounds, making your show easier to find, even when you're not ranking. So 54% plus 33.5, do the math in your head. What's that? 87%? Increasing your findability by 87% just because you've got the right messaging and positioning dialed in and you know exactly what keywords to go after and to work into your podcast messaging so that people can discover you. Not just being discoverable, like, hey, it exists on Apple. Why are people not finding my show? But actually being discovered. Actually popping up in those search results when people are searching for solutions to the problem that they have that your podcast solves. And so 13% of the way that people find podcasts to get us to that 100% of how people are actually discovering shows is the podcast charts. Now, these have decreased in popularity through the years as search gets better, but it's still a way that people find podcasts. No different than if you or I were at the gym and we're opening up Spotify and we're like, what do I want to listen to today? I'm tired of all the music on my playlist. Let me go click on one of the playlists that Spotify has curated for me, and I'm going to see what new music I can find. And we pick a genre and we start listening. So user behavior, if they're looking for a new podcast, a listener is going to open up their podcast app. They are either going to type in a keyword or search term to see what pops up. They're going to choose from that, or they're going to open up the charts and they might browse business or marketing or health and fitness or self-improvement or whatever category or topic of interest that they have. So the more frequently you can get your show appearing on the charts, the more you can get your show showing up in the top 5 search results of keyword terms that your listener is searching for. And the better your messaging and positioning is, and by better, I mean clearer, more specific, and more relevant, the more recommendable your show will be. Then there's not a whole lot of marketing and promotion you have to do for your show. How do I know? Experience. I publish 2 episodes a week on this podcast right now. And we optimize for SEO. We have a recommendable show. And our show ranks on the charts pretty frequently. I can't tell you the last time I guested on a podcast. I can't tell you the last time I ran an ad for the podcast. Actually, I can, because we did an experiment last year where we ran ads and the experiment didn't go well. It didn't go well. I learned a lot from it. So all these other tactics that people say to grow your show. I can't tell you the last time I mentioned the podcast on social media. I barely ever post on social media. If you follow me there, you know, because this is my home. The podcast is my home. And so people are finding the show. The show is growing week over week, month over month. Our numbers are higher than ever as far as quantitative metrics go. But I'm not doing a whole lot to market and promote. Everything I'm sharing here, these 3 things, is your baseline. So when we're building a marketing strategy with a client, this is the baseline goal. Then beyond that, we can start to do other things with the podcast and layer in additional strategies to get the show in front of more cold traffic as your bandwidth and as your budget allows, because that's different for everyone. I'll tell you right now, every marketing tactic out there works to some degree, but not every tactic will work for you. Not because it doesn't work, the tactic itself, but because it's not the right tactic for you. So when you have that baseline in place, you're charting, people are recommending your show, you've got the podcast SEO dialed in, well, then we kind of look at the lowest hanging fruit. What's the best use of your time? So there's a lot of strategies, all with varying degrees of time involvement and skill level. But at the end of the day, none of those things are actually going to matter if we don't have the basics in place first, if we don't have the right foundation in place first. And then also beginning to look at your podcast a little differently when it comes to your warm audience. And instead of sharing the show in hopes that your warm audience is going to go back and listen and that that's going to drive more downloads, instead looking at your podcast as a way to nurture, to use your content to nurture the people who are already warm. Because warm audience is not going to help you grow a podcast. It might drive a couple more listeners each week. But to grow, you have to get it in front of cold traffic. So instead, you can use your podcast as the source of the content in your emails and your social posts. You can use it, as my friend Kevin Schmidlin says, to participate on social media, share behind the scenes, leverage your show to help listeners feel more connected to you. Another question I get sometimes is, well, what if I add another episode? Is that going to help me grow my podcast? It's going to give you the false impression of growth because you might see more listens, but those listens are going to be coming from your warm listeners listening. Ask me how I know. Our listeners are highly engaged. You listening right now, you are mega fans. And we're building our fan base made up of amazing listeners just like you. But ultimately, to grow, I know that I got to get the show discovered by new listeners. So bringing out another episode a week might benefit you who's already listening. You might love it, but it's not necessarily from a growth strategy perspective going to help grow the show. So as podcast hosts, you got to understand this. You need to understand so that you're spending your time on what matters and you're spending your time where it matters. So all of this to say, here's what I would encourage. First, I would have you look at your click-through and your retention rates of your podcast right now. We've talked about this here on the show, and I'll link to those episodes in the show notes, because in your Spotify for Creators dashboard, as well as looking in your Apple Podcasts Connect dashboard at your average episode consumption time, you'll be able to figure out, are people engaging with your show from the moment that they see it? Are they clicking through when they see your cover art and when they see your title? Are they pressing play? Are they listening? And having insights into this data and into these numbers can help us diagnose a low click-through rate. If you've got a low click-through rate, if on Spotify that first click-through is less than 10%, we got a messaging and a positioning problem. It's going to be difficult to attract new listeners, and the marketing that you do is likely not going to yield a return. The good news is now we know exactly what to fix, because we can fix that and then build a marketing strategy from there versus putting the cart before the horse. If that second click-through rate on Spotify is less than 65%, we've got a retention problem. So great. Now we know we need to solve for this first before spending time on marketing. So we got to get those numbers where we need, and then we can optimize for SEO so that people who are already searching for a podcast like yours, i.e. your most targeted listeners, the best listeners for you, can find you. And only then, when we have these basics in place, will it make sense to actually put more time into marketing, because now you have more confidence that your marketing efforts will pay off. So my hope is that walking away from this episode, you now have a deeper understanding of what it actually takes to grow a podcast. and some of the misconceptions in the industry that are actually misleading and why. And why posting your podcast on social media is not actually going to get you very far, but dialing in some of the other things that we talked about today will. So the beauty is that as podcast hosts, this is a platform where we can experiment, we can learn, we can grow. And so yes, you can go out and figure this out for yourself, but it might take you months. It might take you years. So if you want to shortcut that trial and error process and get a strategy in place that actually yields predictable growth for your show, and that works for your podcast and your bandwidth and your budget, that's what we do every day inside of Pod Launch. So if you're serious about growing your show and you want support and help to map out a strategy that's built for your podcast, go to the show notes, book a call with my team. Let's find out if you're a fit for Pod Launch. And if you're looking for next steps right now, as in, okay, I just finished this episode, I want more, go check out the show notes for all those episodes I mentioned. That I'm going to link there for you to help you diagnose your numbers and set realistic expectations and build a strategy that actually gets your show in front of new listeners who need it. And then stick around, because in the next episode, I have got a fellow podcast host and Pod Launch graduate joining me to show you the specific changes that she made to take her stalled podcast to a top 100 show that drives new leads and sales to her business every single day. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.